When his stepmother kicked him out on his 18th birthday, she told him the only thing his father left him was a worthless, abandoned metal shop in the middle of nowhere. What he found inside wasn't just his inheritance. It was the truth that would save his life. If you've ever felt lost or underestimated, if you've ever been handed something that felt more like a burden than a gift, this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button because we're about to go on a journey together, and I promise you, you're not alone in this. The door clicked shut behind me with a sound of finality, a cheap plastic sound that didn't feel heavy enough for the weight of the moment. For a second, I just stood there on the cracked concrete of the porch, the worn strap of my duffel bag digging into my shoulder. The air was cold, that damp, biting cold of a late October morning that gets into your bones. Carol didn't even say goodbye. She just handed me a single, rusty key attached to a faded yellow tag and an envelope. Inside the envelope was $200 in crumpled 20s and a folded, yellowing deed. "Happy birthday, Leo," she'd said, her voice as thin and brittle as old paper. "You're a man now. You're on your own." She pointed a long, bony finger at the key. "Your father left you that old workshop of his. It's all he had. A pile of junk in some dead-end town called Northwood. The property taxes are probably more than it's worth. My lawyer said you have to take possession now that you're of legal age. It's your problem now." And that was it. 18 years of my life, the last 6 spent in that house after Dad died, and it all ended with a click of a lock and the word problem. I looked down at the key in my palm. It was iron, heavy and pitted with rust, the kind of old-fashioned key you see in movies. The tag had an address scrawled on it in my father's familiar, blocky handwriting. I didn't recognize the name of the street or the town. Northwood. It sounded cold and remote, a place at the edge of the map. A worthless metal shop. The words echoed in my head, laced with Carol's usual dismissive tone. She'd always spoken of my dad's hobby that way, as if his passion for welding and shaping steel was a childish waste of time, a distraction from his real job managing a hardware store. After he died, she sold his tools, cleared out the garage, and erased every trace of him she could. Except, apparently, this. This one last, worthless piece of him she couldn't wait to burden me with. I slid the key into my pocket, the cold metal a stark contrast to the warmth of my skin. The $200 felt like both a fortune and an insult. It was severance pay for a childhood. I walked down the driveway, not looking back. There was nothing to look back at. That house had stopped being a home the day my father's heart gave out. It had just been a place I slept. A place where I was tolerated, like a piece of furniture that was too heavy to move. Now the furniture was finally on the curb. The bus station was a few miles away, and I walked the whole distance, the duffel bag growing heavier with every step. It didn't contain much. A few changes of clothes, a worn copy of a book my dad gave me, a photo of him and me at a fishing derby, his arms slung around my shoulder, both of us grinning. It was the only photo I had. Everything else was just stuff. I sat on a hard plastic bench, the station smelling of disinfectant and despair, and stared at the departure board. Northwood wasn't on it. Of course it wasn't. It was probably one of those places the bus only passed through if you flagged it down on a lonely stretch of highway. I went to the ticket counter, the woman behind the glass looking bored. "I need to get to Northwood," I said, my voice sounding younger than I felt. She chewed her gum slowly, tapping at her keyboard with long, painted nails. "Closest we get is a crossroads 10 miles south, Route 7. Bus leaves in an hour. It'll be a 4-hour ride." I paid for the ticket, the exchange depleting a significant chunk of my severance package. The flimsy paper in my hand felt like a ticket to oblivion. For a moment, a wave of pure, cold panic washed over me. What was I doing? I was chasing a ghost to a place I'd never heard of, based on the word of a woman who despised me. The shop was probably a collapsed shed. The land was probably a toxic waste site. This was a fool's errand. I could just turn around. I could take the remaining money and find a cheap motel in the city, look for a job, disappear. I could throw the key in a storm drain and forget about Northwood, forget about my father's last, strange gift. The thought was tempting. It was the easy path, the path of survival. But then I thought of my father's hands. They were always calloused and stained with grease, but they were gentle. He could fix anything, a broken bike chain, a toaster, my scraped knee. He taught me how to read a blueprint, how to hold a hammer properly. He loved the smell of hot metal and the hiss of a welding torch. He saw potential in things other people threw away. He wouldn't have left me a pile of junk. He wouldn't have. Maybe Carol was wrong, or maybe she was right, and this was all that was left. Either way, I had to know. It was the only piece of him I had left to hold on to. The bus ride was a long, rumbling journey through a landscape that seemed to be slowly dying. The vibrant city gave way to sprawling, identical suburbs, which in turn bled into tired-looking farmland and then, finally, into dense, dark forests of pine and birch. The sky was a uniform sheet of gray, and a light, persistent drizzle slicked the windows, blurring the world outside into a watercolor of greens and browns. I watched the miles tick by, each one taking me further from everything I'd ever known and closer to a complete unknown. The other passengers were ghosts, their faces pale in the dim light of the bus, their expressions vacant. We were all just moving from one place to another, suspended in the space between. My mind drifted back to Dad. After the accident at the plant where he worked part-time, the one that left him with a permanent limp, he'd become quieter, more withdrawn. He spent more and more time in his garage workshop. Carol called it his escape. He's hiding from the world in there, she'd complain. But I knew it wasn't hiding. It was creating. He'd emerge smelling of ozone and steel, a small, proud smile on his face, holding some new creation, a twisted metal bird, an intricate gate hinge, a perfectly balanced tool. He was an artist, but he called himself a fabricator. He said it was more honest. I wondered if the shop in Northwood was like that garage, a place where he could be himself, away from the judgment of the world, away from Carol. Why had he never told me about it? The question sat like a stone in my gut. Was it a secret he was ashamed of, or one he was protecting? The bus driver called out, "Route 7 Crossroads," his voice cracking through the hypnotic drone of the engine. I was the only one who moved. I grabbed my bag and stumbled to the front. The doors hissed open, letting in a blast of cold, damp air that smelled of wet earth and pine needles. I stepped out onto a patch of gravel at the intersection of two empty roads. The bus pulled away with a groan and a cloud of diesel fumes, leaving me in a profound and unnerving silence. There was nothing here. Just the two roads, a dense wall of trees on all sides, and a single, battered sign that read, "Northwood, 10 miles, with an arrow pointing down the narrower of the two roads. 10 miles. It might as well have been 100. There were no cars, no houses, no signs of life. Just the whisper of the wind in the pines, and the steady drip of water from the branches. I pulled my jacket tighter and started walking. The asphalt was cracked and uneven. The yellow line faded to a ghost. The drizzle intensified into a steady, cold rain, soaking through my jeans and chilling me to the bone. Every so often, a logging truck would roar past, spraying me with a wave of gritty water, the driver a faceless silhouette behind the wheel. I felt small and insignificant, a tiny figure lost in a vast, indifferent landscape. Doubt began to creep back in, colder and sharper than the rain. This was a mistake, a huge, life-altering mistake. I was an 18-year-old kid with less than $150 in his pocket, walking to a place that might not even exist. a place that even if it did, was declared worthless. My hope, which had been a tiny, flickering flame, was being systematically extinguished by the cold, the wet, and the crushing loneliness of this road. I thought about my friends from school, probably at their part-time jobs or getting ready to go out, living their normal lives. My life had never been normal, but this felt like a new level of abnormal. This felt like the beginning of a story you tell someone else as a warning. After what felt like an eternity, the trees began to thin slightly. A few houses appeared, set far back from the road, with peeling paint and yards full of rusting equipment. Then I saw a sign for a general store, its letters faded but readable. A dim light glowed in the window. It felt like an outpost of civilization. I pushed open the door, a small bell tinkling overhead, and stepped inside. The store was small and cramped, smelling of sawdust and coffee. An old man with a thick white beard sat behind the counter, reading a newspaper. He looked up at me over his glasses, his expression unreadable. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "I'm looking for a property," I said, my teeth chattering slightly. "An old metal shop, out on Ridge Road." The man lowered his paper. He studied me for a long moment. "That'd be Old Man Miller's place. Haven't seen anyone out there in years. Not since he passed." Old Man Miller. That was my father. It was strange to hear him called that, like he was some local legend I didn't know. "He was my father," I said quietly. The man's eyebrows raised a fraction. "Is that right? Well, I'll be. You've got his eyes." He gave me a sad smile. "He was a good man. Kept to himself mostly, but a hard worker." He pointed a thick finger towards the door. "Ridge Road is another mile up. First left. Can't miss it. Big ugly metal building on a hill." His words gave me a small sliver of warmth. Someone here knew my dad, remembered him. It wasn't just a ghost story. I thanked him, bought a bottle of water and a stale granola bar, and headed back out into the rain. The final mile felt the longest. My legs ached, my clothes were soaked, and the initial shock had worn off, leaving a deep, resonant exhaustion. Then I saw it. A narrow, overgrown dirt track branching off the main road. A rusted chain-link gate hung open on one hinge. I walked up the track, the mud sucking at my shoes. And there it was, just as the store owner had described. A massive, windowless building of corrugated steel, its gray paint peeling in long strips, revealing patches of angry red rust underneath. It sat on a concrete slab at the top of a small rise, surrounded by a sea of weeds and overgrown brush. It looked less like a building and more like a beached whale, slowly decaying back into the earth. It looked completely, utterly worthless. My heart sank. Carol had been right. For a moment, I just stood there in the rain, the duffel bag feeling like it was filled with lead. This was it. This was my inheritance, a tomb of rust and weeds. I felt a surge of anger, at my father for leaving me this mess, at Carol for her smug satisfaction, at the world for being so cruel. I wanted to turn around, walk away, and never think about this place again. But my feet wouldn't move. I was anchored to the spot by that one last thread of connection to my dad. I had to see inside. I had to know. I walked up to the large sliding bay door and saw a smaller, man-sized door cut into it. The lock was old and weathered. I pulled the heavy iron key from my pocket. My hand was shaking. From the cold or from nerves, I couldn't tell. I slid the key into the lock. It resisted, grating with years of disuse. I put my shoulder into it, turning with all my strength. There was a loud, painful screech of metal on metal, and then a solid, satisfying clunk. The lock had turned. I pulled the handle, and the heavy door swung inward with a low groan, opening into darkness. The air that rolled out was thick and cold, carrying the scent of old oil, cold steel, and something else, the dry, papery smell of dust and time. It was the smell of my father's garage, magnified 100 times. It was the smell of my childhood. I took a step inside, out of the rain, and pulled the door shut behind me, plunging myself into near total blackness. I fumbled along the wall until my fingers found a light switch. I flicked it up. Nothing, of course. The power had probably been shut off for years. I pulled out my phone, its screen a welcome beacon in the oppressive dark, and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut a narrow path through the gloom, and I took in my inheritance for the first time. The space was immense, far bigger than I'd imagined. The ceiling soared 30 feet above me, lost in a web of steel rafters. The concrete floor was stained and cracked, and everywhere there were shapes. Hulking, monstrous shapes shrouded in gray canvas tarps, like sleeping giants. They were machines. I walked closer to one and pulled back a corner of the tarp. Dust motes danced in my phone's light. Underneath was a massive metal lathe, its steel surfaces coated in a thin layer of protective grease. I moved to the next one. A drill press the size of a small car. A milling machine. A bandsaw with a blade as long as my arm. This wasn't a hobbyist's workshop. This was a serious industrial fabrication shop. My dad had managed a hardware store. Where did all this come from? I swept the light across the room. Along one wall were workbenches littered with tools, all neatly organized, all coated in the same layer of dust. Vices, grinders, calipers, wrenches, and everywhere there were pieces of metal. Sheets of steel and aluminum stacked against the wall, rods of brass and copper in racks, and strange, half-finished sculptures that looked like alien skeletons. In the far corner, almost hidden behind a towering shelving unit, was another door. A simple wooden office door. It was locked. There was no keyhole, just a modern deadbolt. I tried the old iron key, but it was the wrong shape. I rattled the knob, but it was solid. Frustration gnawed at me. The answers, if there were any, were behind that door. I looked around the workshop, my light landing on a heavy crowbar leaning against a workbench. It felt wrong, like a violation. But I had come too far to be stopped by a locked door. I wedged the tip of the crowbar into the doorframe and leaned on it with all my weight. The wood splintered with a sharp crack. I pushed again, and the frame gave way with a groan of protest. The door swung open. The office was small, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, a stark contrast to the cavernous workshop outside. A single window, covered in grime, looked out over the overgrown property. There was a simple metal desk, a worn-out office chair, and a bank of gray filing cabinets. Unlike the workshop, everything here was clean, almost sterile. It was as if my father had been here yesterday. My phone's light reflected off something on the desk. A metal box. It was a simple, heavy-duty lockbox, the kind you'd store cash or important documents in. And on the front, there was a keyhole. An old-fashioned, skeleton keyhole. With a trembling hand, I took out the rusty iron key Carol had given me. I slid it into the lock. This time, it fit perfectly. It turned with a smooth, silent click. I lifted the lid. Inside, my breath caught in my throat. The first thing I saw were bundles of cash, $100 bills, neatly wrapped in paper bands. I counted them slowly, my hands shaking. There was over $100,000. A life-changing amount of money. It was enough to go anywhere, do anything. Enough to start over completely. Beneath the cash was a small, old-school cassette player, the kind with chunky plastic buttons, and a single cassette tape labeled with my name, Leo. And under that, a thick stack of manila envelopes, held together by a thick rubber band. The The top one was also addressed to me in my father's hand. I sank into the dusty office chair, my legs suddenly weak. The silence of the workshop pressed in on me. I picked up the top envelope. It was heavy, thick with paper. I tore it open and began to read. "My dearest Leo," the letter began, and the sight of his handwriting, the familiar loops and sharp angles, made my eyes well up. "If you are reading this, then it means I'm gone. It also means that woman, Carol, has finally kicked you out. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for so many things. I know you must have 1,000 questions. Why this place? Why the secret? I will try to explain. It's a long story and not a happy one, but you deserve the truth." I had to pause, my vision blurring. I wiped my eyes on my sleeve and kept reading, the beam of my phone steady on the page. "The man you knew, the manager of a hardware store. That wasn't the whole story. Before you were born, I had a business partner, a man named Marcus. We were brilliant together. I could build anything, and he could sell anything. We had a specialty fabrication shop, much like this one, but bigger. We made custom parts for aerospace companies, prototypes for inventors, things no one else could make. We were successful. Very successful. My mind struggled to process this. My dad, the quiet, humble man I knew, had been a successful entrepreneur. It didn't fit the picture I had of him. But Marcus had a weakness, the letter continued. He liked to gamble. At first, it was small. Then it got bigger. He started borrowing against the business, cooking the books to hide it from me. He got in deep with some very dangerous people. The kind of people who don't care about legal contracts. When I finally found out, it was too late. The debt was astronomical. They came to the shop one night. They weren't there to talk. They destroyed our equipment, threatened my life, and gave me an ultimatum. Pay them back, or they would go after my family. You were just a baby, Leo. Your mother had passed a year earlier. You were all I had in the world. A cold dread spread through me. I could almost picture the scene, the violence, the fear in my father's eyes. I couldn't fight them, he wrote. I couldn't go to the police without putting you in more danger. So I made a deal. I gave them everything, the business, the patents, our home. I walked away with nothing but the clothes on my back and you in my arms. I agreed to disappear. I took a low-wage job, moved us to a small town, and became a ghost. I met Carol. She was stable. I thought she would be good for you, a mother figure. I see now that was a mistake, and I am sorry for it. But at the time, I was just trying to keep you safe. He explained that he had salvaged some of his old equipment before the creditors took over, hiding it away. Years later, when he was sure no one was looking for him anymore, he bought this piece of land under a shell corporation. It was remote, forgotten, perfect. He built this shop with his own hands, piece by piece, on the weekends. He told Carol it was just a storage unit for his hobby stuff so she wouldn't get curious or see it as an asset. This place, Leo, this was my real life, he wrote. I came here to do the work I was born to do. I took on secret projects, small batch commissions for clients who valued discretion and quality above all else. I built things here, beautiful things, and I saved every penny. The money in this box is for you. It's your start. It's the inheritance I could never declare legally, the one I had to hide from the world to keep it safe for you. The letter was several pages long, detailing the clients, the projects, the intricate dance he had to do to keep his new life a secret. He wasn't just a fabricator. He was an artist, a master craftsman. The half-finished sculptures in the workshop were his personal projects, his passion. This shop, son, it's not worthless. It's the opposite. The machines are old, but they are the best of their kind. I maintained them perfectly. The land itself is nothing special, but the shop. The shop is a sanctuary. It's everything I was and everything I hoped you could be. Strong, independent, a builder. I put the letter down, my hands trembling. My whole understanding of my father had been upended. He wasn't a man who had settled for a simple life. He was a man who had sacrificed a brilliant one to protect me. The years of quiet sadness I saw in him weren't from failure. They were from the weight of his secrets, the burden of his love. The feeling wasn't anger anymore. It was a profound, aching grief, mixed with a fierce, burning pride. I picked up the cassette player. My finger hovered over the play button. I was almost afraid to hear his voice, to have him be that close again. I took a deep breath and pressed it. There was a hiss of static, and then his voice. It was rougher than I remembered, strained, but it was him. "Leo," he said, and the sound of my name in his voice was like a physical blow. "If you're hearing this, I guess I ran out of time. There's so much I wanted to tell you face to face. So much I wanted to teach you." He coughed, a dry, rattling sound. "This life, it's a hard thing. It'll knock you down. People will tell you what you're worth, what you can and can't do. Don't you listen to them. You listen to that voice inside you, the one that knows how to build things. I saw it in you, even when you were little, the way you took things apart just to see how they worked. You have my hands, son. You have my heart." His voice cracked with emotion. "I know it's a lot to ask. This place is a burden. It's a responsibility. You can take the money and run. Go to college, travel the world. Forget all about this rusty old shed. I wouldn't blame you. I want you to be happy, Leo. That's all I've ever wanted. But if you choose to stay, if you choose to pick up where I left off, you'll find everything you need here. My notes, my plans, my tools. It's all here. This is your legacy, if you want it. The choice is yours. Whatever you do, know that I love you. Know that I was always, always proud of you." The tape clicked off, leaving only the sound of static and the hammering of my own heart. I sat there in the dark, silent office, tears streaming down my face, and I cried. I cried for the father I had lost twice, once to death, and once to a truth I never knew. I cried for the lonely boy I had been, who thought his father was just a simple man beaten down by life. I cried for the sacrifices he had made, the secret life he had lived, all for me. The weight of his love, his hope, his trust, felt heavier than any building, more valuable than any amount of money. I sat in that chair for hours as the last of the daylight faded outside the grimy window, leaving me in the cold, absolute darkness of the workshop, with only my phone's dying battery for light. The initial wave of grief and shock slowly receded, leaving behind a tumultuous sea of confusion and fear. I looked at the piles of cash in the box, $100,000. It was an escape hatch, a clean break. I could walk out of this place, catch a bus to anywhere, and invent a new life. No one would know. I could get an apartment, a car, go to school. I could be a normal person, free from the ghosts of my father's past and the weight of this rusty inheritance. The thought was intoxicating. It was the easy path, the safe path. Who in their right mind would choose to stay here, in a cold, dark, isolated workshop, with the threat of his father's old enemies potentially still out there somewhere? Then my phone buzzed, the vibration unnaturally loud in the silence. It was an unknown number. My first instinct was to ignore it, but something made me answer. "Hello?" I said, my voice hoarse. "Am I speaking with Leo Miller?" a man's voice asked. It was calm, professional, and devoid of any emotion. "Yes," I said cautiously. "Who is this?" "My name is Arthur Evans. I was your father's attorney." My heart skipped a beat. My father had a lawyer? "Your father left instructions for me to contact you upon his passing, but his wife was not cooperative in providing your contact information." I've been trying to reach you for some time. I'm calling about the Northwood property. Of course, the letters mentioned him, Mr. Evans, the calm, pragmatic helper. I'm here now, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I'm at the shop. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Good, Mr. Evans said, a hint of relief in his tone. That's good. Leo, we need to talk. Your father set up the ownership of that property in a very specific way, through a trust to protect it. However, now that you are of legal age, control has transferred to you. And there are interested parties. Interested parties? I asked, a knot tightening in my stomach. A development corporation, Vesta Holdings. They've been making offers on the land for the past year. They started low, but their offers have become substantial. They want the land for a new logistics hub, apparently. Proximity to the highway. Your stepmother received the offers but dismissed them, assuming the property was, in her words, a worthless liability. The most recent offer, which I received yesterday, is for $500,000. $500,000. The number hung in the air, seeming to suck all the oxygen out of the small office. My mind reeled. Combined with the cash in the box, it was more money than I could even comprehend. It was a one-way ticket to a life of security, a life free from worry. All I had to do was sign a piece of paper. They've given us a deadline, Mr. Evans continued, his voice pulling me back to reality. They want a decision by the end of the week. They're getting aggressive. I suspect they know something about the zoning or upcoming infrastructure plans that we don't. If you accept the offer, the process will be quick. The money will be in an account for you within 30 days. 30 days. 30 days to a new life. The temptation was a physical force, pulling at me, promising warmth and safety and an end to the struggle. I looked around the dark office, at the schematics pinned to the wall that I couldn't understand, at the cold metal desk. This place was a monument to a man I barely knew. It was his dream, not mine. Taking the money wasn't a betrayal. It was the logical choice. It was what my father himself had offered me on the tape. Take the money and run. I wouldn't blame you. But then I thought about his voice, the raw emotion when he talked about his work. I thought about the love and care that went into grinding every tool, maintaining every machine, saving every dollar, all to give me this choice. Selling it felt like selling his soul. It felt like letting the world he tried so hard to build for me be bulldozed into dust for a logistics hub. It felt like letting the bad guys win, the ones who had taken everything from him once before. I was caught between two futures. One was clear, bright, and easy. The other was dark, uncertain, and filled with impossibly hard work. One was an escape. The other was a fight. What kind of man did I want to be? The kind who runs, or the kind who builds? I spent that night in the office, huddled in the worn-out chair, wrapped in one of the dusty tarps from the workshop for warmth. I didn't sleep. I just sat there in the profound, country-dark silence, the box with its life-changing contents open on the desk in front of me. I read and reread my father's letters, absorbing the details of his secret life. I learned about the custom-forged components he made for a vintage aircraft restorer in Arizona, the intricate metal gates he designed for an eccentric author in Vermont, the precision tools he crafted for a watchmaker in Switzerland. Each project was a story, a testament to his skill and artistry. This wasn't just a place he worked, it was a place he lived, truly and deeply. The hardware store, his life with Carol, that was the ghost life. This was the real him, and he had left it all to me. As dawn approached, a thin, watery light began to seep through the grime on the window, slowly illuminating the office. The gray light fell across the schematics on the wall, and for the first time, I saw them not as incomprehensible lines, but as a language. a language my father spoke fluently, a language he had wanted to teach me. I thought of his hands, those calloused, capable hands. I looked down at my own. They were soft, the hands of a kid who had done nothing more strenuous than stock shelves and write essays. But they were his hands. They had the same shape, the same long fingers. Maybe, just maybe, they held the same potential. The choice became clear. It wasn't even a choice anymore, it was a calling. To take the money and run would be to abandon him all over again. To stay, to learn, to fight for this place, that would be to honor him. To get to know him, finally, through the work he left behind. It was terrifying. I had no idea how to run a business, how to use these machines, how to stand up to a powerful development corporation. I was just an 18-year-old kid with a duffel bag and a box of cash. But for the first time in my life, I felt a sense of purpose. It was a fragile, terrifying purpose, but it was mine. I found my phone, which had died during the night, and plugged it into a portable battery pack I had in my bag. As it came to life, I found Arthur Evans's number and dialed. He answered on the second ring. "Mr. Evans," I said, my voice stronger and clearer than it had been the day before. "It's Leo Miller." "Leo, have you had time to consider the offer?" "I have," I said, taking a deep breath. "Tell Vesta Holdings the answer is no. The property is not for sale." There was a moment of silence on the line. I could hear the faint sound of papers shuffling. "Are you certain, son?" "Mr. Evans asked, his tone carefully neutral. $500,000 is a significant sum for an undeveloped rural property. "I'm certain," I said, looking around the dusty office that was beginning to feel like a command center. "This was my father's workshop. I'm not going to let them tear it down. I'm going to get it running again." I could almost hear the lawyer's eyebrows raise over the phone. "I see," he said slowly. "That is an ambitious undertaking. Vesta Holdings will not be pleased. They are not accustomed to being told no." "Then they can get used to it," I said, a surge of defiant energy coursing through me. I sounded braver than I felt, but saying the words made them feel more real. Another pause. Then Mr. Evans's voice changed. The professional detachment softened, replaced by a note of something that sounded almost like admiration. "All right, Leo," he said. "All right. Your father would be proud. He always said you had a steel backbone. You just hadn't found it yet." "It seems you have. Now, this won't be easy. Vesta will likely counteroffer, and when that fails, they may try other tactics. We need to be prepared. The first step is to get the property legally squared away in your name and ensure the trust is ironclad. I'll handle that. Your job is to focus on the shop." We talked for another hour, laying out a plan. He would be my legal shield. I would be the boots on the ground. When I hung up, the sun was fully up, and golden light was streaming through the dirty window, cutting through the dust in the air like solid beams. The shop was no longer a tomb. It was a battlefield. And I was no longer a lost boy. I was the keeper of my father's legacy. The first few weeks were the hardest. The sheer scale of the task ahead was overwhelming. The shop was cold, damp, and silent. My first priority was to make it livable. I used some of the cash from the box to buy a heavy-duty generator, work lights, a propane heater, and cleaning supplies. I spent the first 4 days just sweeping. I filled dozens of trash bags with dust, old rags, and debris. With every push of the broom, I felt like I was clearing away not just the physical grime, but the years of neglect and sadness that had settled over the place. Next, I tackled the machines. I took the tarps off all of them, revealing the incredible pieces of engineering that lay beneath. They were intimidating, alien, but my father had left me a roadmap. In the filing cabinets in the office, I found meticulously organized binders for every single piece of equipment. They contained the original manuals, his own handwritten notes on maintenance, and detailed logs of every repair and oil change. He had cared for these machines like they were living things. I followed his notes to the letter, cleaning each machine with solvents, lubricating the moving parts, and carefully checking the electrical connections. It was slow, painstaking work. I cut my hands, strained my back, and ended most days covered in grease from head to toe. I slept on a cot in the office, warming canned soup on a hot plate. It was a lonely, Spartan existence. But I wasn't just cleaning machines. I was learning their language, understanding how they worked. I was communing with my father's ghost. Every grease-stained page of his notes was a conversation with him. Every perfectly maintained gear was a testament to his discipline. One afternoon, while cleaning out a workbench drawer, I found a small, leather-bound journal. It wasn't a work log, it was personal. I opened it and found pages filled with his thoughts, his fears, his hopes for me. He wrote about watching me grow up, about the pain of not being able to share his true self with me. He wrote about his dream of one day bringing me to the shop, of teaching me the trade, of passing his legacy on not as a burden, but as a gift. Reading it was like getting a lifetime of conversations I never had, all at once. After 2 weeks of relentless work, the day came to test my efforts. I had reconnected the main breaker and gotten the power company to turn the service back on. I stood before the giant lathe, the first machine on my father's maintenance checklist. My heart was pounding. I took a deep breath and flipped the switch. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a low hum that grew into a powerful, steady whir, the motor spun to life. The machine was alive. I went to the next one, the drill press. It, too, sprang to life with a satisfying roar. One by one, I resurrected the sleeping giants of the workshop. The silence was replaced by the hum of potential energy. I stood in the middle of the floor, surrounded by the sound of the machines, and I laughed. It was a raw, triumphant sound that echoed through the vast space. I had done it. The shop was breathing again. It was around that time that I got my first visitor. An old pickup truck, rusted and dented, rumbled up the dirt track and stopped outside the open bay door. The man who got out was the old store owner, the one who had given me directions on my first day. He had a thermos in one hand and 2 mugs in the other. "Figured you might be getting tired of your own company," he said, his voice gruff. "Name's Gus." He poured 2 cups of steaming coffee, and we sat on a couple of upturned buckets, looking out at the woods. He told me he'd known my father for years. "Frank was a good man," Gus said, sipping his coffee. Quiet, kept to himself. But you could tell there was a lot going on behind those eyes. He used to buy all his steel from my brother's scrapyard. Always paid in cash. We all figured he had a story, but nobody around here pries. He looked around the workshop, at the gleaming machines and the clean floor. "Looks like you're doing right by him," he said, a note of respect in his voice. "If you need anything, a hand with something heavy, a bit of advice, you know where to find me." It was a simple offer, but it meant the world to me. For the first time since I'd arrived, I didn't feel completely alone. I was starting to become part of the landscape, just like my father had been. Weeks turned into months. I fell into a rhythm. My days were spent cleaning, repairing, and studying. My nights were spent poring over my father's blueprints and journals, teaching myself the basics of metallurgy and design. I started with simple projects, welding scraps of metal together, trying to replicate the clean, strong seams I saw in his work. My first attempts were clumsy, ugly things, but I kept at it, fueled by coffee and a stubborn refusal to fail. I was clumsy, but I was learning. I was making mistakes, but I was growing. Mr. Evans handled the legal front. Vesta Holdings, as predicted, was persistent. They sent another, higher offer, which we refused. Then came the letters from their lawyers, filled with veiled threats about zoning violations and code enforcement. Mr. Evans, true to his word, was a shield. He batted away their claims one by one, burying them in paperwork and legal precedent. I knew it was a temporary peace, but it gave me the time I needed. I was in a race to learn, to become strong enough to defend this place not just with lawyers, but with my own two hands. I started taking on small jobs, repairs for local farmers that Gus sent my way. A broken plow, a bent trailer hitch. The work was simple, but it was a start. It brought in a little money, and more importantly, it connected me to the community. People started to know me not as Old Man Miller's kid, but as Leo, the guy who could fix things. Just like my dad. One crisp spring morning, I stood in the massive, open bay door of the workshop, a cup of coffee in my hand, watching the sunrise paint the sky over the pine trees. The shop was humming behind me, not just with the sound of machines, but with the energy of life, of purpose. It was no longer a cold, dark tomb. It was my home. I thought about the word inheritance. When Carol had spit it at me, it meant a burden, a worthless piece of junk. I realized now that she was right, in a way. If you only measure value in the speed of a sale, in the cold calculus of dollars and cents, then this place was worthless. Its real value couldn't be liquidated. It was in the lessons etched into the workbench, in the strength I discovered in my own hands, in the second chance it offered me to build a life, not just for myself, but for the memory of the father I was only now beginning to know. He hadn't left me a pile of junk. He had left me a blueprint for a man. He had given me a sanctuary, built not just of steel and concrete, but of sacrifice and love. He had shown me that the most valuable things in this world are the things you have to fight for, the things you have to build yourself. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. The fight with Vesta Holdings was far from over. The journey of mastering my father's craft would take a lifetime. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the future. I was ready to build it. And that brings me to you. If you've made it this far, thank you. Thank you for listening. Maybe my story resonates with you. Maybe you've been handed something that felt like a curse, only to find out it was a hidden blessing. Maybe you've had to fight to redefine what words like home, family, or inheritance mean to you. We all have these stories. We all have these burdens that can be turned into our greatest strengths. What you've just heard is the story of how I found my way. But this channel isn't just about my story. It's about yours too. It's a community for people who understand that the most important things in life aren't given to us. They're forged. They're built through hard work, through facing down our fears, and through refusing to let anyone else tell us what we're worth. If that sounds like a community you want to be a part of, I'd be honored if you'd hit that subscribe button. And I want you to do me a favor. In the comments below, I want you to tell me, what is the most important thing you've ever built? It doesn't have to be with your hands. It could be a relationship, a skill, a second chance. I'll be reading every single comment because your stories matter. You matter. Thank you for being here. Now, let's get back to work.